We begin in Quebec City, where Prime Minister Mark Carney has gathered with his cabinet before Parliament returns next week. The CBC's Olivia Stefanovich is there covering this cabinet retreat, we used to call them, Olivia. I think they call them planning forums now. But look, like earlier this week in Davos, Mark Carney spoke today of international challenges, but with a bit more of a domestic lens. Well, what do Canadians need to know about the Prime Minister's message today?
Well, David, this is the Prime Minister's second major speech this week, and it was delivered here at home. And so the audience that Carney meant to speak to really here was Canadians. While the one he delivered in Davos earlier this week, that audience was for the international audience. So two different audiences here, similar messages though, and in many ways these two speeches complement each other. If you look at the one that he delivered in Davos, Switzerland, before the World Economic Order, that one spoke about the state of the world and Carney's blunt assessment of this rupture in the international order. And the one he delivered today in Quebec City, David, really concentrated on where Canada stands in all of this and how Canada can be a beacon for the world, according to the Prime Minister, and how it can lead by example through its values. Now, Carney did not take questions from the media today, but he did make a point of responding to fresh criticism from U.S. President Donald Trump, who just yesterday at the World Economic Forum, during a speech, he responded to what the Prime Minister said a day earlier, and he said that Canadians need to be more grateful to Americans, and he named Carney specifically and then went on to claim that Canada lives because of the U.S. So here's what the Prime Minister had to say about that relationship today.
Canada and the United States have built a remarkable partnership in the economy, in security, and in rich cultural exchange. But Canada doesn't live because of the United States. Canada thrives because we are Canadian.
Now, what's notable, David, is that response from Carney was not in the prepared remarks that were distributed to media before the Prime Minister spoke, before this cabinet forum got underway today in Quebec City. But we have been told by the Prime Minister's office, since Carney did speak, that he was always planning to address this latest criticism from the U.S. President. Having said all that, what's still unclear is where this leaves Canada with the review of the Canada-U.S.-Mexico agreement, this CUSMA review that's supposed to be underway, and where Canada stands in all of this in its relationship with the U.S. But the Prime Minister did say briefly today, David, that when it comes to speaking with the President, they speak all the time, according to the Prime Minister.
Okay, that is an interesting relationship. I wonder if the President will post those text messages at any point. But look, in response to the multiple speeches this week, we got a written response today from Pierre Poilievre to what the Prime Minister's message was at Davos. So walk us through some of that, Olivia, and what else is on the agenda as Cabinet meets in Quebec City.
Yeah, and it is a lengthy response that we received from Conservative Leader Pierre Poilievre, where he actually starts by giving the Prime Minister some kudos in a way. What he said specifically is that the speech that the Prime Minister delivered in Davos was well crafted, according to Pierre Poilievre, and eloquently delivered. And he says that he agrees with the Prime Minister that Canada must work with like-minded allies and become more self-reliant. But then the disagreement pops up. And what Poilievre gets into in this lengthy statement is that the Prime Minister has made a bunch of promises, for example, working on major projects, considering projects under review, but hasn't actually acted on this or, declared any projects in the national interest, like an oil pipeline that the Conservatives would like to see, shovels in the ground already. And he also takes aim at the fact that this is not just the Prime Minister's problem, but this is a pattern, in his view, with the Liberal government in general after, more than 10 years of this, of a Liberal government, a federal government in Canada. So, he had a lengthy response today to this speech. And we know, David, that along with international issues in the relationship with the U.S., Cabinet is also supposed to tackle some of these other pressing domestic issues, including affordability, which is another concern from the Conservatives. And they are hearing from experts over the next 2 days, including those in finance. And they actually heard from economists from major Canadian banks today too, David, and they are trying to make a plan to lower costs for Canadians. So that is a major focus as well for this cabinet planning forum, especially ahead of Parliament returning from its winter break next week. But so far we haven't seen any sign that the opposition is willing to be more cooperative with the federal government to help pass its agenda.
Okay, Olivia, thank you so much. That's the CBC's Olivia Stefanovich in Quebec City at the Cabinet Retreat. Okay, we're going to break down Carney's message today and what it might say about Canada's electoral future. So we've summoned the Davids of the Round Table. We've got David McLaughlin, he was Chief of Staff to Prime Minister Brian Mulroney, and David Herle, who was Liberal campaign co-chair under Paul Martin. This is like that Monty Python sketch where I have to call you Bruce so nobody gets confused. David McLaughlin, the dual messages from the Prime Minister this week. I mean, what sort of an agenda is he laying out here for Canada in the world and then Canada at home? Because he talked a lot about choices, the choices middle powers have to make in this world order and the choices Canada has to make here at home.
Well, he's setting out a realpolitik sort of definition of how he sees the world. I mean, he's actually been quite consistent when you think of it in saying that there's been a rupture in the world time continuum, if you will, with Donald Trump. He said that at the outset of his prime ministership last March. So he's really continuing that vein. But he's trying to tell Canadians that, look, the things have changed and things aren't going to be as easy as we might have thought they were going to be. He's still, and I think in that vein, he's also trying to sort of retrospectively explain why he went to China, why he went to Qatar, and two regimes that are not exactly on our high on our democratic values list. But he's saying, look, in this sort of new world of principled pragmatism or pragmatic principalism, I don't know. We have to we have to trade and invest and get investment from the world as it is, not the way we'd like it to be. So I think it's a realpolitik sort of dynamic he's trying to set up for people.
David Herle, after Davos and sort of the global headlines it created, there was, I think, an anticipation of something major here today, and less so from the Quebec City speech, but kind of a bookend, I think, to the other one, for domestic consumption. What do you make of the contours of what the Prime Minister's laid out here?
Well, I think you're right. I think that they are two pieces of two elements of a single piece, and the Davos one hit so hard because he was so comfortable with that material, and he was saying truths that everybody knew the second they heard them were truths, but they hadn't heard somebody say that before. So that really hit hard. This one, the speech today doesn't have that same element to it, but I think it's also a necessary piece because what he's trying to do is tell Canadians, this is how we are going to comport ourselves in order to be successful in this new world. And the second of all, a bit of a rallying cry about who we are and what we stand for and what we believe, which is important for two reasons. One of which is, this new world he's talking about and this new relationship with the United States and China and others, it's not going to be easy. And it will test our solidarity as a people. And so he's speaking to that.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is, as he's been going around in a flurry of activity, and you mentioned China and you mentioned Qatar, there have been people who are more on the left side of the Canadian spectrum who've been very comfortable with the use of Canadian soft power over the years, who've become very comfortable in a Pearsonian context as Canadians, who were wondering what he was doing and how that fit in with traditional Canadian foreign policy. And so I think he addressed exactly what it meant to be a small L liberal Canadian in the modern world, and I think that was important for him politically.
It was interesting, David Herle, that the speech in Davos kind of became the framework. I think he's outlining that you apply this test of all of these deals he's doing with less trustworthy countries than Canada is more comfortable dealing with against, right? That even since the election, the threat landscape has expanded. And you have to do this. So how does he get everybody here to come on board with that? Because it's going to cause some consternation in certain areas.
Well, he has. I mean, frankly, I think his problem is fairly limited to certain intellectual circles, because he really has a very strong card in his hand right now, and that is unbelievable antipathy in Canada toward the United States, toward Donald Trump in particular, but toward the United States in general. So things that people wouldn't have been prepared to accept previously. Domestically, we see it on issues like pipelines. In foreign policy, we can see it on things like relationships with China or India that people might have frowned on a few years ago because we don't think they're perfect on human rights issues, or we think they're interfering in our domestic politics. Is now something that we have to overlook some of these things, and we have to deal with the world as we find it, and that is that not everybody that we're going to trade with or do business with is going to share our values or see the world we do. And I think that is something that Canadians would normally have reacted badly to, but in the current context of the relationship with the United States are probably much more likely to understand.
So David McLaughlin, when I heard some of the stuff about the speech in Davos about if you can't feed yourself and don't have you don't have sovereignty, and he talked about energy in that, and that convinced me that this government is dead set on getting a pipeline to the BC coast. When you look at it in the framework of what he said, that we need to take care of business so we can resist the bullies of the New World Order, that just said to me that this is an absolute priority for them, even if they soft pedal it a little bit.
I would agree with that, but I think it also shows that he has to deliver on it. And I think that was really the thrust of what Mr. Poilievre, as leader of the opposition, was saying. Look, these are all fine things that you're saying, and maybe we don't even disagree with them, but you've got to see some proof in the pudding. You've got to actually see these things happen. So it's one thing to state what the challenge is, and it's important that it's stated. And then we had this very consequential, very important foreign policy statement, perhaps the most important in decades, by our Canadian Prime Minister. But it does have to be followed through with tangible progress. I don't mean that, I'm not trying to carp or anything on it. I'm just saying that what does this actually mean? You roll it out. It does mean more energy pipelines. It does mean trading with rather odious partners on the human rights front. It does mean diversifying our trade and investment patterns, and it does mean getting government out of the way to get building done. There's a whole range of things underneath that has to happen for this to make this thing real for them. But the Canada-U.S. relationship is still, in a way, job one.
Sure.
I agree with David Herle. I mean, there is this antipathy there that gives the Prime Minister some running room here, not to have had a deal now and be able to say certain things. But we do need a deal. We do need a renewed, somehow refreshed trading relationship with the United States. And so that still is going to be the thing that I think the Prime Minister will be mostly graded on when he does go to the people, as he will do at some point. And that we still have to, we don't know where we're at yet.
So on that, I just want to talk about that because, we saw what he said, and like he talked about American hegemony, or the American hegemon, I believe is the phrase, in Davos. Didn't mention Trump by name, didn't say the United States of America. Trump kind of pushed back yesterday saying Canada lives because of us or can't live without us, and remember that, Mark, is the way he said it. And Carney said today, the Prime Minister did that, we don't live because of the U.S., we thrive because we are Canadian. Where does this leave the relationship? Because Lutnick was out, the Commerce Secretary, saying, Canada's got the second best deal in the world, and you never hear Mark Carney say that. He whines all the time. Carney actually says we've got the best deal with the U.S. in the world, not the second best deal, right? But it acknowledges the challenges. But you don't want to look eager, and the subtext of everything in Davos was build strength so you can resist the pressure, which seems to be what's happening. Where does this leave the U.S. relationship then in terms of making the progress people want to see?
I think it leaves it where it was the day before the speech in Davos. I mean, in a way, we don't really know. Donald Trump remains this kind of disruptive, coercive, covetous, acquisitive, president who will be, will do things and say things at a moment's notice. I mean, at least he called him Mark, and I do give the Prime Minister credit. I do think that there is some genuine relationship between the two,
seems to be,
as individuals, and that which will help navigate through. But no Prime Minister of Canada can leave on the playing field a statement like that by the President in terms of, well, you because of us is the only reason you live. The President did have a point when it came to freebies on national defense.
Sure.
And I think the Prime Minister and this government is trying to reinvest in national defense in a bigger way to get to our NATO targets, et cetera, and that's all good. But the general thrust will be, yes, this is going to be hard work to keep maintaining that relationship. At the end of the day, though, we still need some kind of economic deal to succeed CUSMA. We don't know yet where we're at.
Yeah, I think they realized they had to hit the NATO target as cover charge to be taken seriously at the big person table. David Herle, your thoughts on the Canada-U.S. relationship, and I quickly want to get your thoughts on the opposition response to this, because they got a statement I want to run by you. So David Herle, where do you think this leaves things with Trump after everything this week?
Well, I agree with you too that we don't know, but I'm a little bit darker than I think both of you are, because I don't understand how you can really listen to what Donald Trump says about trade, hear what he believes about tariffs, and think that CUSMA can survive in anything resembling its current form under him. I don't really see how that's possible, and I assume that any conditions on which we had that kind of free trade would be conditions that Canada has previously been prepared to not to accept. So I'm pretty skeptical about the renewal of CUSMA, and I doubt that the Prime Minister is counting on that. I think in terms of the opposition response, I think that they've done what they could do in the first couple of days. I mean, the speech was so overwhelmingly received well that what they've said is good speech, but let's see where the action is, and let's see what you do with it. Michelle Rempel stated that most articulately, I think, in a Substack, and that's
Right.
that's a fair critique, and we'll have to wait and see what happens.
Let me just jump in there, David, because I do want to show Mr. Poilievre issued a statement. I just want to show one little bit that builds on the point you're making. He praised the speech as being eloquent and well delivered, but then he says what stood out was when he pointed out, he being Carney, the gaps between rhetoric and reality. That is especially true here at home. If liberal words and good intentions were tradable commodities, Canada would already be the richest nation on earth. Less the specifics of the response, David Herle, where does all this kind of leave the Conservatives, where there is this sort of dominance of global issues very much at the front of mind domestically, and that's tough for an opposition party to get into the middle of, and it's tough to criticize without being seen as you're being offside with the country, right?
I think the Conservatives have a very strong set of issues with which to compete against the Liberals in an election campaign. That's affordability, that's the cost of housing, that's the cost of food, that is anxieties about immigration, anxieties about crime. They're very strong on all those issues, and those issues are important to Canadians. Where I think they are in real trouble is on worldview. And I think that this issue is 100 miles of bad road for them.
Yeah.
Many of them are Trump supporters. Many conservative voters are Trump supporters, but many are not, right? This antipathy toward the United States extends deep into their own voting base. But so much of the leadership of the party comes from the reform base of that party and are not traditional PCs. And they can't, in my view, the reason why Poilievre and so many of his colleagues cannot respond in a way that resonates with Canadians is because they don't feel it themselves. They don't genuinely feel it, so they can't express it. And the biggest danger for them is if they go down the road of starting to defend Trump's administration as not being as bad as China's, or not being as bad as a Middle Eastern regime, and start to take the American side of the debate, because there's only like about 15% of the vote there.
That's an interesting point, and I wonder what the role the algorithms play in that, right? In that divide that we're going through intellectually. David McLaughlin, your thoughts on where this leaves the Conservatives in their response to this today?
I think that's the kind of statement you put out if you've never traveled outside the country as leader of the opposition. And I think this is the compelling point for me, and it reinforces the perspective of that you have a leader for the world stage, and you have Mr. Carney, and you have a leader for the Canadian stage, Mr. Poilievre. This is a deliberate choice, but these things, and these choices were made earlier. Same choice that invited the remnants of the People's Party of Canada, who will be more pro-Trump, more along the lines of what David Herle is talking about, very much into the tent of the present Conservative Party, which now creates a kind of a dam that is holding back this ability to reach out for more centrist voters, accessible voters, because that is now a stronger, more animated part of his base. And so he is actually constrained and shrunk his margin to maneuver. No question that he is he's doing the right thing with the cards that he has dealt himself, which is let's bring it back to domestic issues. I concur with David. He's got a good domestic set of issues to work with, and he will try to translate some kind of Carney failure, on the international front into domestic, despair at the affordability door in houses and the GTA and elsewhere where he's going to be shopping for votes. That's fine, but if it's a contest on leadership, and at the end of the day, these things very much revolve around that. I think that what the speech that happened this week and the response to it and the framing that is happening with Canadians will be advantage Mark Carney, disadvantage Pierre Poilievre.
There are two really smart Davids at this table, and I'm not in the top two. I want to thank you both. I appreciate the insight and the experience. That was great stuff. David Herle and David McLaughlin, we always appreciate the time.